"Get this man out before the guests see him." The words cut through the marble lobby just as two security guards stepped forward. The old man standing beneath the crystal chandelier looked as though he had wandered in from the rain by mistake. Water dripped from his torn brown coat. Mud clung to his worn shoes. A faded canvas backpack hung from one shoulder, and beneath his arm he carried an old blue book with cracked corners. Around him, the lobby of the Beaumont Grand Hotel glowed with cold white light. Business executives crossed the polished floor without looking at him. A wealthy couple moved farther away, as though poverty were something contagious. No one recognized the man. 3 days earlier, he had arrived in the city by private jet. His real name was Richard Beaumont, the millionaire founder and owner of the hotel chain. For 32 years, his name had been engraved on buildings, contracts, and awards. Yet very few of his employees had ever met him face to face. That night, Richard had removed his tailored suit, left his watch in the penthouse safe, and dressed in clothes purchased from a second-hand store. He wanted to learn what happened inside his hotels when no one powerful was watching. The front desk manager, Daniel Price, stared at Richard with open disgust. "This is a private hotel," Daniel said. "You can't stay here." Richard tightened his grip on the old blue book. "I'm not asking for a room," he replied softly. "I only need somewhere warm for a few minutes." Daniel gave a humorless laugh. He glanced toward several guests near the elevators, embarrassed that they had witnessed the conversation. "Security." The guards moved closer. Richard had expected impatience. He had expected suspicion. That was part of the test. But he had not expected the pleasure in Daniel's eyes. Then a metal cleaning cart rolled out from the hallway. The woman pushing it stopped when she saw the scene. Her name tag read Maya Carter, housekeeping. She was in her early 30s, with tired eyes and dark hair pulled into a loose knot. Her uniform was clean but faded at the elbows. One of her shoes had been repaired with black tape, and a small photograph of a little boy was tucked behind the clear plastic of her name badge. Maya looked at Daniel, then at the guards, then at the soaked stranger. "Sir, he's freezing," she said. Daniel's expression hardened. "Maya, stay out of this." Richard lowered his gaze. He had spent his entire life watching people become polite the moment they discovered his wealth. Tonight, no one knew there was money behind the torn coat. That was when kindness mattered. Maya hesitated for only a second. Then she reached beneath her cleaning cart, pulled out her own gray cardigan, and placed it over Richard's wet shoulders. The lobby fell strangely quiet. Daniel stepped toward her. "Take that back and return to work." Maya did not move. Instead, she turned to the nearest security guard and handed him her employee access card. "What are you doing?" Daniel demanded. Maya looked directly at him, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "If helping a cold man is enough to lose this job, then you won't need to fire me." Richard stared at the access card in the guard's hand. He had entered the Beaumont Grand expecting to discover which employees deserved to be dismissed. Instead, the poorest person in the lobby had just risked everything to protect the richest man in the building. Maya Carter had learned early that kindness was rarely convenient. By 5 the next morning, she was standing in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, warming a can of soup while rain tapped against the window. The place had only one bedroom, so Maya slept on a folding couch beside the kitchen. The bedroom belonged to her 8-year-old son, Noah. He was already awake. Noah sat at the small table wearing a red sweater that had become too short at the wrists. In front of him lay a stack of school papers and a plastic model airplane with one broken wing. "Did you lose your job?" he asked. Maya stopped stirring the soup. She had hoped to protect him from the answer for at least one more day. "Maybe," she said. Noah lowered his eyes. "Because of the old man?" "Because I made a choice." She placed the bowl in front of him and smiled as though nothing was wrong. But the final notice on the refrigerator said otherwise. Rent was due in 6 days. Her bank account held less than $40, and the medicine Noah needed for his asthma would have to be refilled before the end of the week. Maya had been raising him alone since her husband, Thomas, died in a highway accident 4 years earlier. Thomas had been a mechanic with rough hands and an easy laugh. He could repair almost anything, from a broken engine to a child's toy, but he had never learned how to prepare his family for a world without him. After his death, Maya sold his tools one by one. All except a small silver screwdriver set he had kept inside a worn leather case. She carried it everywhere in the bottom of her cleaning bag. Thomas had once told her, "People throw things away too quickly. Most things only need someone patient enough to look closer." That sentence had stayed with her. At the hotel, Maya often fixed loose cabinet hinges, broken luggage wheels, jammed locks, and flickering lamps before maintenance arrived. She never asked for credit. She simply hated seeing useful things abandoned. The old blue book Richard carried the night before had caught her attention for the same reason. Its spine was nearly separated from the cover, and a gold symbol had been pressed into the faded cloth, a small airplane above 3 waves. She had seen that symbol before. It was stamped on the inside of Thomas's silver tool case. Maya had noticed it when she wrapped the cardigan around the stranger, but there had been no time to ask him about it. Now, as Noah pushed the broken model airplane across the table, she opened the leather case and studied the symbol again. "Mom," Noah whispered, "what will we do?" Maya took out the smallest screwdriver and began repairing the broken wing. "We'll do what your father taught us." "What's that?" She clicked the tiny piece back into place and handed him the airplane. "We look closer before we give up." Across the city, inside the Beaumont Grand's private penthouse, Richard stood before a wall of security screens. He watched the lobby recording again. Maya giving him her cardigan. Maya surrendering her access card. Maya walking out into the rain without defending herself. Then Richard opened the old blue book. On the first page was the same gold symbol Maya had noticed. Beneath it, written in faded ink, were 6 words. "For the man who saved my life." Richard touched the handwriting with trembling fingers. Then he picked up the phone. "Find everything you can about Maya Carter," he said. "And do it before Daniel fires her." By 9 o'clock that morning, Maya was back at the Beaumont Grand. She had been ordered to report to the manager's office before her shift. The message contained no explanation, but she already knew what waited behind the glass door. Daniel Price sat behind a wide walnut desk, perfectly dressed in a navy suit. Maya's employee access card lay in front of him beside a printed incident report. 2 department supervisors stood near the window. They did not look at her. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You embarrassed this hotel in front of paying guests." Maya folded her hands to keep them from shaking. "I helped someone who was cold." "You disobeyed a direct order." "He wasn't threatening anyone." Daniel's jaw tightened. To Maya, the office felt colder than the rainy street outside. Through the glass wall, employees passed with their heads lowered. Some glanced in, then quickly turned away. Everyone knew what happened to people who challenged Daniel. He picked up the report. "I can recommend immediate termination." Maya thought of Noah sitting in school with his repaired airplane. She thought of the rent notice and the nearly empty medicine container above the kitchen sink. For one painful second, she considered apologizing for everything. Then she remembered the old man's soaked shoulders beneath her cardigan. "I understand," she said quietly. Daniel studied her, almost disappointed that she did not beg. Before he could continue, the office door opened. Richard stepped inside wearing the same torn brown coat. The gray cardigan Maya had given him was folded carefully over one arm. His faded backpack still hung from his shoulder, and the old blue book remained tucked beneath it. Daniel shot to his feet. "How did you get back in here?" Richard looked past him toward Maya. "I came to return this." He offered her the cardigan. Daniel moved between them. "Security was told not to admit you." Richard's eyes settled on the incident report. "Is she being punished because of me?" "That is none of your concern." Maya noticed something Daniel did not. The old man was no longer shivering. His back was straight. His voice was calm. There was no fear in his face. Richard turned toward the glass wall, where several employees had slowed their steps to watch. "I heard this hotel was built on service," he said. "I didn't realize kindness was against company policy." Daniel's face reddened. "You need to leave now." Richard nodded as though accepting the decision. Then he deliberately let the old blue book slip from his hand. It struck the floor and opened near the middle. A yellowed photograph slid across the carpet. Maya bent down first. The picture showed two young men standing beside a damaged seaplane near a rocky shoreline. One of them was clearly a much younger Richard. The other wore a mechanic's jacket and held a silver tool case marked with the same airplane and wave symbol. Maya froze. She knew that face. It was Thomas's father, the grandfather Noah had never met. Daniel snatched the photograph from her hand. "What is this supposed to prove?" Richard did not answer him. He looked only at Maya. "Where did you get that symbol on your tool case?" Maya's breath caught. "It belonged to my husband's family." For the first time, Richard's composure broke. His eyes filled with recognition, grief, and something close to disbelief. Before he could speak, Daniel tore the incident report in half and pointed toward the door. "Both of you. Out." Maya picked up the photograph from his desk and placed it back inside the book. Then Richard quietly asked her a question that made everyone in the office stop moving. "Was your husband's father named Samuel Carter?" Maya stared at Richard as the office seemed to shrink around them. "Yes," she whispered. "Samuel Carter was my husband's father." Richard gripped the back of a chair. For 30 years, he had searched for the mechanic who had dragged him from a sinking seaplane during a storm off the Maine coast. Samuel had disappeared before Richard could properly thank him. The only things left from that night were the photograph and the old blue flight log he carried everywhere. Daniel gave an impatient laugh. "This is becoming ridiculous." Before Richard could answer, a violent metallic sound rolled through the building. The lights flickered. Then an alarm began screaming from the hallway. A woman's voice came through the hotel radio. "Elevator 3 is stuck between floors. There are 6 guests inside." Daniel rushed toward the door. Maya and Richard followed him into the lobby, where people had gathered beneath the glowing elevator numbers. The display above elevator 3 flashed between 11 and 12. From behind the metal doors came a muffled pounding. "My daughter is in there," a man shouted. "Do something." Daniel grabbed the maintenance supervisor by the arm. "Open it." "We can't," the supervisor said. "The emergency system isn't responding." Inside the elevator, a child began crying. The sound changed the room. Even the wealthy guests who had avoided Richard the night before now stood frozen, staring at the doors. Daniel looked toward the security team. "Call the fire department." "They're already coming," someone replied. Maya stepped closer to the control panel. She heard a faint clicking behind the wall, 3 fast clicks, a pause, then 2 more. Her face tightened. "What happened before it stopped?" she asked. The maintenance supervisor frowned. "There was a power surge." Maya crouched beside the lower access panel. Daniel seized her shoulder. "Get away from there. You're a housekeeper." Maya looked up at him. "And they're running out of air." She opened her cleaning bag and pulled out Samuel Carter's worn leather tool case. Richard's breath caught when he saw the gold airplane above the 3 waves. Maya removed the smallest silver screwdriver. She had watched Thomas repair elevator controls in old apartment buildings when they were newly married. He had taught her how to recognize the sound of a safety relay failing to reset. She was not an engineer, and she knew better than to touch the main electrical system. But she also knew the doors had a separate manual release. "The motor isn't the problem," she said. "The lock thinks the elevator is still moving." The supervisor knelt beside her. He listened to the clicking. Then his expression changed. "She's right." Together, following the supervisor's instructions, Maya removed the panel and revealed a bent release lever trapped beneath a loose wire bracket. The expensive diagnostic system had missed it. Maya used the tiny screwdriver to lift the bracket while the supervisor reset the lever. The clicking stopped. For one breathless second, nothing happened. Then the elevator descended slowly to the 11th floor. The lobby monitor showed the doors opening. A few moments later, 6 shaken guests emerged from the stairwell. A little girl ran into her father's arms, and the entire lobby broke into relieved applause. Maya stepped back, unnoticed at first, still holding the silver screwdriver. Richard looked at the employees surrounding her. "That woman was ready to lose her job for a stranger," he said. "And now she may have saved 6 lives because she noticed what everyone else ignored." Daniel turned toward him angrily. "Who do you think you are?" Richard removed the wet brown coat. Underneath it was a perfectly tailored suit. He reached into his backpack and placed the hotel's original ownership document on the front desk. "My name is Richard Beaumont," he said. "And I own this hotel." The lobby fell silent. Richard looked at Daniel, then at the torn termination report still clenched in his hand. "You were right about one thing," he said calmly. "Someone is being fired today." No one moved. The applause that had filled the lobby only moments earlier faded into a silence so complete that Maya could hear the silver screwdriver trembling against the metal case in her hand. Daniel stared at Richard's tailored suit, then at the ownership papers on the desk. "Mr. Beaumont," he said, his voice suddenly smaller, "I can explain." Richard looked at him with the same quiet expression he had worn beneath the torn coat. "That is what people say when kindness becomes expensive." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Richard turned toward Maya. She was still kneeling beside her cleaning bag, surrounded by guests, executives, and employees who had ignored her for years. Yet she looked less triumphant than frightened. "I didn't save them alone," she said. The maintenance supervisor knew what to do. The supervisor shook his head. "I would never have checked that lever without you." Maya closed the leather tool case. "My husband taught me to listen before touching anything." Richard's eyes lowered to the gold symbol stamped into the worn leather. The airplane above 3 waves. The same mark pressed into the cover of his old blue book. He slowly opened the flight log and removed the yellowed photograph. "In 1994, he said, "I was 26 years old and believed money could protect me from everything." The people around him leaned closer. Richard had been flying with a business partner along the coast of Maine when their small seaplane lost power during a storm. The aircraft struck the water hard, trapping Richard inside as the cabin filled. The other man in the photograph, Samuel Carter, had been working at a nearby repair dock. Samuel swam into the freezing water. He broke the damaged door open with a small silver tool and pulled Richard toward shore. Then he stayed beside him through the night, wrapping him in his own coat until help arrived. Richard touched the cracked edge of the photograph. "I offered him money," he said. "He refused." Maya's eyes filled with tears. Richard continued. Samuel had accepted only one thing, a promise that if Richard ever saw someone cold, frightened, or forgotten, he would not walk past them. That promise had been written on the final page of the blue book. Richard had carried it for decades. But as his hotels grew, the promise became something he remembered rather than something he lived. He donated money, signed checks, and funded charities, but he rarely stood close enough to see the people those acts were meant to help. "Samuel disappeared before I could find him again," Richard said. "What happened to him?" Maya looked down at the tool case. "He died before Noah was born." Richard closed his eyes. Maya explained that Samuel had passed the tools to Thomas, along with the story of a young pilot he once saved. Thomas had never known the pilot's name. To him, it was not a story about rescuing a future millionaire. It was a lesson about helping someone before asking who they were. The night before, Maya had seen Richard shivering in the lobby. She had not known his identity. She had only remembered the words Thomas repeated whenever life made kindness difficult. "Don't measure a person's worth by what they can give back." Richard looked at the gray cardigan folded over the desk. Samuel had once wrapped him in a coat on a freezing shoreline. 32 years later, Samuel's daughter-in-law had done the same thing beneath a hotel chandelier. The act had traveled through a family, passed from one pair of hands to another, until it returned to the man who had nearly forgotten it. Richard stepped closer to Maya. "I spent years looking for Samuel so I could repay him." Maya wiped a tear from her cheek. "He never wanted repayment." "No," Richard said. "But I think he wanted the promise kept." He looked toward Daniel, the supervisors, and the employees crowded around the lobby. Then he placed Maya's access card in her hand. "Tomorrow morning, I'm calling a meeting with every manager in this company." Maya stared at him. Richard's voice softened. "And I want you sitting beside me." The next morning, the Beaumont Grand's conference room was filled with people who had never once asked Maya Carter what she thought. Regional directors sat around a polished table. Department heads whispered beneath the pale light. Hotel managers from 3 states appeared on a wall of screens, waiting for Richard Beaumont to explain why an emergency meeting had been called. Maya stood outside the glass doors in her faded housekeeping uniform. Her old shoes had been cleaned, but the black tape still crossed one side. Samuel Carter's silver tool case rested beneath her arm. She felt more out of place there than she ever had pushing a cleaning cart through the presidential suites. Richard opened the door himself. "You belong in this room," he said. Maya looked at the executives waiting inside. "No one in there believes that." Neither did they believe the woman fixing an elevator knew more than the men standing around it. He pulled out the chair beside his. Maya sat down. Richard did not begin with profit charts or occupancy numbers. Instead, he placed the torn brown coat, the gray cardigan, and the old blue book in the center of the table. Then he told them what had happened. He described the guests who looked away, the manager who called security, and the housekeeper who risked her only income to keep a stranger warm. Daniel Price had been dismissed that morning after an investigation revealed years of complaints he had ignored or buried. But Richard made it clear that one cruel manager was not the only problem. "A company becomes what it rewards," he said. "And for too long, we rewarded appearances instead of character." He announced a new policy allowing hotel employees to provide emergency food, shelter, and basic assistance to anyone in immediate need without fearing punishment. Every complaint involving disrespect toward vulnerable guests would now be independently reviewed. Then Richard turned to Maya. "I want you to lead the new employee care and guest dignity program." Maya thought she had misunderstood him. "I clean rooms." "You see people," Richard replied. "That is harder to teach." The position came with training, a salary large enough to end her constant fear of rent notices, and full medical coverage for Noah. Richard also created a scholarship in Samuel and Thomas Carter's names for employees and their children who wanted to study engineering, hospitality, or skilled trades. But the greatest change happened that evening. Richard visited Maya's small apartment without cameras, reporters, or assistants. Noah opened the door holding his repaired model airplane. Richard knelt until they were eye to eye. "Your great-grandfather once saved my life." Noah looked at the old blue book under Richard's arm. "Did he know you were rich?" Richard smiled sadly. "No. That's why his kindness was real." Months later, Maya stood in the renovated lobby of the Beaumont Grand as the hotel opened a small room near the entrance. It offered hot drinks, dry clothing, phone access, and temporary shelter to anyone caught in an emergency. Above the door hung Samuel's photograph. Beneath it were the words Richard had nearly forgotten. "Help first. Ask who they are later." Maya kept her housekeeping name badge in her new office, beside the silver tool case. It reminded her that no title had made her valuable. The value had always been there, even when powerful people refused to see it. And Richard never tested his employees in disguise again. He had already learned what he needed to know. Wealth could reveal how people treated the powerful. Only vulnerability revealed how they treated everyone else. Sometimes, one small act of kindness does not return as a reward. It returns as a responsibility to pass that kindness on. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes character matters more than appearance. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us how one compassionate choice can change a life.